Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you were enjoying our music as much as I was. Super congratulations to the class of 2025. Y'all did it. My name is Samara Berger. I am with the Office of Enrollment Management, and I am so excited to welcome you to our final Trailblazer session of the spring series, Beauty, Colonial Discourse, and the Middle Ages with Dr. Afrodesia McCannon. Our hope today is that you'll get a glimpse into our vibrant academic community. You'll be able to decide for yourself if this is the place where you want to call home, as so many others have. And we hope that you'll leave this session today feeling really inspired by our talented faculty, getting a sense of what it is like to sit in the classroom with a rich, diverse community of thinkers, scholars, change makers, and go-getters. Before we go any further, I do just want to share a couple of housekeeping tips. So please note you will be muted throughout the duration of the session, but while we can't see you, we do feel your energy out there. So we ask that you stick with us throughout the webinar. We promise it's going to be some good stuff. We will not cover any admissions or financial aid info today, but if you do have questions about the next steps of your process, please visit our website, give us a call, send us an email, any form that works for you. Our staff is ready and available to help with any questions or concerns you may have about your next steps. If you're interested in asking questions specifically about this session, you can use that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, those two little speech bubbles, and we have some staff members answering your questions behind the scenes, and we'll also have some time for live Q&A at the end of our session. So let's get started. I would love to introduce Dr. Afrodesia McCannon. Dr. McCannon has been a professor in NYU Liberal Studies since 2008. By training, she's a medievalist, focusing on medieval memoir and expression of medieval subjectivity. Her education, career, and travel have taken her all over the world, and she is a native New Yorker from 4 generations of New Yorkers. She comes from a family of artists and considers the arts an essential part of one's education and one's formation as a full person. Professor McCannon received her PhD from the University of California, Berkeley, in comparative literature, French, English, and German. In this webinar, Dr. McCannon will discuss beauty, colonial discourse, and the Middle Ages. For many European nations, the Middle Ages became the site of their national origins. However, in the scholarship of the same era, the period was subject to defamation and dismissal. To this day, the term medieval carries the derogatory connotation of primitive. This language was strikingly similar to discourse about colonized and other peoples who were contemporary with the researchers of their period. This talk is going to explore the link between the study of the medieval sense of beauty and the discourse concerning the aesthetics of the art and of colonized and indigenous peoples to consider a particular dynamic of European identity formation around the turn of the 20th century. So with that, Dr. McCannon, take it away.
Hello, everyone, and I'm sure you have been welcomed to NYU by many people, but let me welcome you as well. So I wanted to share with you some of the research that I've been doing on the Middle Ages. As you heard, I'm a medievalist, and one of the interesting aspects of being a medievalist is looking around and seeing how continually popular the European Middle Ages are. There are video games, reenactment societies, TV series, dinner theater. I think there's a reason for this popularity. The Middle Ages became this very important historical moment for the West. We see it in the scholarship, but also for the society at large. And if you take anything from this short talk, it's how the Middle Ages is an example of how the past was used and is still used to support ideas about the present. So I've been researching the Middle Ages for some time now, and one of the things I noticed early on was that some early 20th century scholars were using really curious language, at least curious to me, to describe the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages and the people of the Middle Ages were infantilized, disdained, dismissed. So for example, a famous French philologist, that's someone who studies language and literature, said of a medieval writer who had chronicled his time on the Crusades, quote, "He seems to have a child's way of feeling and judging." Or again, He has a naive conception of the relation between God and man that makes you smile. Another scholar, an historian who was describing medieval aesthetics, or what people then found beautiful, said that what people in the Middle Ages felt in the face of beauty was a naive wonder, hardly entitled to rank as artistic emotion. And further, the Middle Ages was too colorful. This fondness, full of naive contrast of primary colors. He went on to attack medieval fashion. There it is. This fondness for all that glitters reappears in the general gaudiness of dress, especially in the excessive number of precious stones sewn on the garments. Transferred to the domain of hearing, this partiality for brilliant things is shown by the naive pleasure taken in tinkling or clicking sounds. So you notice the disdain in his voice, and that one word keeps coming up: naive. That is simple, unsophisticated, showing a deep lack of knowledge. So these were examples from two scholars looking at medieval literature and visual arts, but I found this language in a wide variety of writings about the period. The general assessment found in these writings was that the Middle Ages was a time of childlike naivete by not fully formed, often violent individuals. The legacy of these depictions is seen to this day, where the term medieval carries the derogatory connotation of primitive. Like, if you've seen the toilets, it's positively medieval. In the judgments that these scholars made and in the language they used to describe the Middle Ages, our philologist and historian and others replicated many aspects of what we have come to call colonial discourse. That is, the ways in which colonized people of Africa, Asia, the Middle East, and beyond were discussed. Although many colonial discourses existed and colonized peoples varied, there was a noted similarity between the discourses: disdainful, infantilizing, with a belief that they were opposite of us. So the naivete found in the Middle Ages, for example, finds a parallel in the description of the Sudanese by a British colonial administrator. He wrote, "They are indeed mere children, with the thoughtlessness, the waywardness, and the want of foresight of children." The childishness in the colonial administrator's text is the same lack of adult thought processes we saw in the philologist's description of the Crusader, his child's way of feeling and judging. And further, the historian I mentioned also wrote that medieval people experienced life with the directness and absoluteness of the pleasure and pain of child life. So both the people of the Sudan and the Middle Ages were like children. Another example. Editors of an art book on African and oceanic art suggested that the European collectors whose works were represented in the book, when they looked upon the art they had collected, the idols and the fetishes must have, in general, made them smile. And the two smiles, the one at the medieval chronicler and that of the collectors of foreign art, seem related, a kind of patronizing smile of those looking at simple, superstitious people. Another colonial administrator discussing Egyptians wrote, "Their delight in what they call a fantasia, that is to say, any sort of show or entertainment, however simple and commonplace, in music, recitation, masquerade, a marriage festivity, above all in fireworks, is exhilarating to witness." The art book editors I mentioned before try to explain the geometric decorative forms in African art by suggesting that the Negro interested like a child in all that moves, found this way to express movement. So allegedly, they liked movement and glittery stuff. Back to our historian. He described a similar naive wonder in the Middle Ages. We notice that nearly always when men of the Middle Ages attempt to express aesthetic enjoyment, their emotions are caused by the sensations of luminous brightness or of lively movement. So here, the excessive interest in light and movement levied against the indigenous to the colonized lands is equated to the supposed aesthetics of medieval Europe. Medievals too like movement and glittery stuff. So what could be going on here? Scholars, not just me, have begun to explore the interesting parallel of the colonial and the medieval. Western nations very consciously saw similarities between the colonized people and their medieval ancestors. So for example, a series of world fairs occurred at the turn of the last century that featured reconstructions of colonial settings as a means to showcase the colonial conquests in a museum, amusement park, zoo-like setting, sometimes with live colonial subjects. So people who couldn't get to the colonies could walk around these reconstructions and see what they were like. At these fairs, the colonial settings were oddly paired with reconstructions of medieval dwellings with medieval people in them. So in that fairground space, meant not for scholars or colonial administrators, but average people, the colonies in the Middle Ages were conflated as foreign spaces with foreign people. Even the phrenologists got into the mix. So phrenology, there we go, was the study of the shape and the size of the skull as a supposed indicator of the character and mental abilities. This was notoriously applied to racial inferiors to prove that they were racially inferior. In the 19th century, it was also practiced on the skulls of medieval skeletons, extracting proof of their closer proximity to modern primitives than to modern Europeans. But why put them together like this? The pairing of the Middle Ages with foreign peoples seems to stem from the idea, not completely abandoned in our current period, that human history is a narrative of a stream of progress that explains how our own ancestors passed from savagery to civilization. It's a pervasive story or narrative of history. It's been argued that anthropology, which in the past really was the study of other peoples, contributed above all to this idea and to the intellectual justification of the colonial enterprise. Because anthropology promoted a scheme where not only past cultures, but living societies were placed on a temporal slope, a stream of time, some upstream, others downstream. Looking out at other cultures, what the West saw were societies that were downstream, in their infancy or adolescence, as the Europeans had once been downstream, but now they were up. Those other cultures were looked at as others, that is, no longer us. Some scholars even argue that the division of European history into medieval and modern history masks a justification to subjugate medieval people and nations that were existing in the modern era. However, using this idea of the stream of time, of the progress model of history, presented some big problems for Europeans who were relying on it to construct their identity. When measuring the skulls, in one case, the skull of Charlemagne, it was proven that, sure, he was closer to primitives, but also that he was tall and blonde. That is, he had something inherently superior about him that linked him to the superiority of present-day Europeans. Those phrenologists were engaging in a complicated game of identity politics brought about by the exceptional nature of the medieval other. So on one hand, the naive, childlike people of the Middle Ages are downstream in time, like their colonial counterparts, but they're also Europeans. And so somehow they had to be made always already upstream, in that they always possessed the vigor and the superiority of their race. The people of the Middle Ages were called upon to prove another narrative of human history, that is the superiority of European races. A French medieval art historian makes the racial and nationalist implications of the Middle Ages clear and wants to distance medieval Europeans from colonial people. He wrote, "In the Middle Ages, the men of our race, when they were great men, were always ascetics. They always disdained the sensual Orient, its harems, its perfumes, the enchanting curves of its arabesques." He evoked the cliches of his time about the Middle East and the Islamic world. There were harems and ointments and the freedom of licentious sex. The art historian does this to show how the great French men of the past were immune to Oriental sensuality. They disdained, as he does, the voluptuous nature of the Islamic world. He truly believed that what is true of the Middle Ages is also true of modern times. Note, when he speaks of our race, he's speaking specifically of the French race, and will go on to use the superiority of the French in the Middle Ages to disparage the Germans. He's writing during World War I. He says, "Germans, you were inferior in the Middle Ages, you are inferior now, and you will be inferior in the future," because he's evoking the story that what is true in the Middle Ages is also true of modern times. So there's two stories, two narratives of history. People of the Middle Ages were inferior because they're downstream, and people of the Middle Ages are the same as the people are today, that is superior, whether it's Europeans or French or Germans or Anglo-Saxons. The schizophrenic nature or dynamic of degrading the people of the Middle Ages as other and yet calling upon them to support race pride is exemplified in the British colonial administrators writing about the Egyptians. So in one breath, he discusses the native genius of the Anglo-Saxon mind and the practical common sense, which are the distinguishing features of his race. And only pages later, disparages the Middle Ages as the time when man lived enveloped in a cowl, that is, in overzealous religiosity, because a cowl is what monks wear. He compares them to the Muslims of Egypt, who lived, he said, enveloped in the Shariat, which is the Islamic legal codes. To start winding down here, this push and pull on the Middle Ages is still with us. People are still fascinated with the Middle Ages and still use it to express national and race pride. There are statues of medieval figures all over Europe, and negatively, even here in the US, many white supremacists have totally adopted medieval symbols. On the other hand, people are quick to disparage something by calling it medieval, even my colleagues, to my face. Now, all the colonial peoples eventually rose up and got their independence, but the Middle Ages can't rise up. It can't speak back. It offers no resistance to manipulation of its representation, and so became and remains a space on which to project ideas, particularly the West ideas about itself. So am I saying not to play around in the Middle Ages? Does this mean that we shouldn't watch, or let's face it, rewatch the Game of Thrones or dress up in medieval garb if that's your thing? Because those are just made up projections. No, that's not what I'm saying. I encourage you to explore the medieval period and enjoy the Middle Ages. I mean, who doesn't like a dragon? I took this picture in my office yesterday. I just want you to be conscious of the ways in which it has been manipulated, and to be encouraged to learn about the period, the real Middle Ages, the people, the history, the intercultural exchanges. The more I learn about the Middle Ages, the more fascinating it becomes to me. I hope I've been able to express that to you. Again, welcome to NYU, and thank you for listening. I have a queue of works cited should you be interested in learning more.
Dr. McCannon, thank you so much. That was such a beautiful taste of what you have studied, what you can get when you come to NYU and you are actually in the classroom. I know that I have a lot of questions. For our audience, if please pop your questions in that Q&A box. We would love to pitch them to Dr. McCannon here. And maybe to get us started, as you know, some of these new class of 2025 folks are thinking about their areas of study. How did you become interested in this area of study, and what kept you kind of so focused to really make it your career?
I started out as an English major, and you have to read literature from all of the different periods, and I thought I pretty much had everything down pat. Like the modern period I got, early modern period I got, and then I hit the Middle Ages, and I realized I do not understand this. And I just found it so fascinating because I couldn't quite crack it open, that there was something different about like this literature and this culture, that it was in some ways very different from anything else I had experienced. And so I branched out and started looking at French medieval literature and then German medieval literature. And I just found I really found it fascinating. And I wanted to be able to open up the puzzle that was for me the Middle Ages.
I love that. And for students who are thinking about kind of going into this area of study and really diving into the Middle Ages, do you feel like there's a specific topic or sector within that time that's really important to study, especially where we are culturally right now?
Yeah, so one of the new sort of turns in medieval studies is the global Middle Ages. Right. So, and I think my research is part and parcel of that, but really looking at the Middle Ages, and the way it's been studied is, there's England and there's France and there's Germany, and they're really sort of siloed and thought about just as these nations. And the more we learn, the more we find out that that's not at all sort of what the Middle Ages was like. And there was incredible amounts of sort of traveling and sort of intercultural mixing, that medieval London looked a lot like modern London in terms of the types of people who were there. And so if you're interested in studying the Middle Ages, that is like one of the really sort of exciting sort of areas of study right now.
Wow, I love that. And I think the opportunity that NYU provides to be able to study in those physical locations as well throughout your time of study, like you really get to be immersed in that culture and see how it could differ from, being in the United States or wherever your home country may be. And I think that's such a wonderful thing that we have to offer. I have a question here from Safia, who would like to know, which classes might you be teaching next year that our first years have access to? If you know.
Yeah, I do actually. I just looked up my teaching schedule. So I will be teaching the first section of arts and cultures, which is the ancient world. So it's the global ancient world. And I'll also be teaching a course called Approaches to Global Studies. So I'm interested in sort of global studies for the Middle Ages, but also for the modern period. And it's a really interesting and burgeoning field. And we're in the liberal studies. In liberal studies, we are very, very focused on making sure that students understand how important it is to have a global perspective. And the field of global studies is a really great place to start.
I totally agree. I want to take your class. So Safia, I hope that sounded as exciting to you as it does to me. And to kind of build off of your plans for the fall, you said something in your presentation. One of the philosophers said, "What is true of the Middle Ages is true of our times." And how do we unpack that? Especially right now when there is so much cultural discourse and so much lack of understanding, how do we see that mirror there?
Yeah, I think the great thing about studying the Middle Ages is the extent to which that quote is true and not true, right? And for everyone to sort of understand that, yes, we have connections with the past. It's really important to sort of understand what our connections of the past are, but we are not the past and the past is not us. Right? And to be able to know the difference between when I'm projecting something that I want or need or an anxiety that I have sort of on the past or even on the present versus just really looking at something for what it is. And I think like this is a great, for whatever university you end up at, that's the great thing about being at the university is that's really what we're trying to teach you is it doesn't matter in some ways what you think as long as you've thought it through and you've really looked at other people's perspectives, but really have also thought about your own perspective and where it comes from.
Absolutely. That is so, so important. And, one of our other faculty in this series mentioned your ethical north and really figuring out what that is. And I think understanding your history and the histories around you helped to get you to that place. And like you said, university, being able to attend college in general allows you to determine that for yourself and determine who you are. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I have another question from our audience here. You mentioned Game of Thrones and the kind of maybe not accurate representation of the culture. Do you feel like there are other areas within pop culture where you have maybe seen more accuracy that people could be checking out or paying a little bit closer attention to?
In terms of popular sort of culture, I gotta say no.
We're just doing a bad job all around.
Yeah, it's not that it's a bad job, it's that people really enjoy playing with the Middle Ages. There are wonderful documentaries about the Middle Ages, about the Crusades, about even the global Middle Ages. When it comes to popular culture, I haven't yet seen anyone do a really good job with it. Don't get me wrong, loved the Game of Thrones, but could see like what all the sort of issues were. I would do two things. If you'd like the Game of Thrones, but you want to know what's going on, the Getty Museum actually had a really sort of on their website, they had a sort of Q&A for people who are interested in like what's real and what's not in the Game of Thrones, right? Because there's a whole bank of medievalists. So I think enjoy the shows, but do a little research to find out like what might be potentially going on there, what kind of projections are happening. That said, like all historical periods, like we're just studying them. We don't live there. That we can't go back. We can only try to piece together things. So everybody is kind of making it up, except the scholars are making it up with the evidence that they have, as opposed to attempting to entertain people.
Right. That makes so much sense. And that exhibit truly sounds amazing. And I think, the things that people are trying to Google when they're watching the show that, we know how accurate some information online can be. So that sounds fascinating. And I also think a challenge to future medievalists out there to do something that's a little bit more artistic, maybe with some more accurate representation. So class of 2025, you've been challenged. But before we close out, I think this is a really great question to end on from somebody in our audience. Just if you have any text or literature or book recommendations that you would guide folks towards to kind of learn a little bit more, continue their education in this field.
There's so many books to think. I would start with primary texts. So listening to the voices of people from the Middle Ages. And I would go as wide as you can. So think about the areas of the world that you don't know a lot about and just type up medieval literature from or medieval art from. And there's plenty of translations if you're interested in literature and plenty of images online if you're interested there, and really just listen to the voices of the people there. So, if you're interested in French, there's like Marie de France. If you're interested in sort of China, there's like Tang Dynasty poetry. If you're interested in Islam, in sort of the Islamic world, there's the Arabian Nights and a lot of poetry. If you're interested in India, there's like Golden Age theater. If you're interested in Africa, there's the Malian epics. So just find an area of the world and get out of your comfort zone a little bit and type in Middle Ages in and see what comes up.
I I think I'm going to plan to do some research over the weekend, like just to know how wide this spreads and how many different cultures have influenced this time. It's really amazing. And I could see why you have spent so much of your career kind of peeling back all these different layers and really getting in and being, being a professional medievalist. So thank you so much for joining us. I truly am thrilled. I feel like you were a wonderful way to wrap up our spring Trailblazers series. We could not have done it without you. And to our audience, we thank you all so much for being here. Before we wrap up, just a couple of ways to stay connected with us should you need anything in the coming months. Whether you have decided that NYU is the place for you or you're still on the fence, tomorrow is college signing day. So best of luck. You're going to make the right decision wherever you pick. So if you have questions about NYU before you make that choice, you can reach out to us at admissions@nyu.edu. If you're specifically interested in NYU Abu Dhabi, you can reach out at nyuad.admissions@nyu.edu. And similarly, NYU Shanghai at shanghai.admissions@nyu.edu. Of course, follow us on all the social channels at Meet NYU. We are constantly dropping in new content. You're going to see some current students and a journey in what their life here at NYU looks like. So please stick around with us. Super congratulations again. Best of luck in your decisions. And with that, we thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you to campus very soon. Bye,
Best of luck.
everybody.
Bye.